Welcome to
Mile High Hockey Lab.
Mile High Hockey Lab.
Hello and welcome to the Mile High Hockey Lab. My name is Adrian Hernandez. We are here today to talk about the Colorado Avalanche and all things pertinent and relatively recent. So I'm here with managing editor Evan, I'm here with Ezra, and I'm here with Jacob. Hello, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining me.
As always.
Yeah. So
Good to be here.
Yeah. So let's just, honestly, we got a lot to talk about today. I feel like this is one of the more active shows that we're going to have in terms of getting into a lot of topics. So we'll just drop the puck and get right into our poll of the week, which I was kind of stumped on what even to ask because everything so far and currently is centered around injuries. And I feel like we've done 6 episodes about injuries. So I didn't want to do that. So the poll of the week was, how worried are you that the Avalanche might miss the playoffs? Now that we've fallen into the wild card in the standings, I think that may have raised some eyebrows once people looked in the standings. So I'll start with you, Evan. How worried are you, and do you agree with the poll results, which are that we're not that worried, but bordering sort of worried?
Yeah, I won't lie. When I saw the poll, I thought it was like, just how worried are you right now? And I put somewhat worried, which I feel like that's acceptable. I didn't realize it had said playoffs. I obviously can't read. I feel like that's important for the job. But that's a side tangent. Anywho, I'm not worried about missing the playoffs. I'm more so worried about where they're going to end up.
Gotcha.
Because the longer that this has been going on, the less likely it seems as if they are going to end up in the top of the Central. The more this carries on, the more this continues, and the more there's more setbacks and injuries and all that. We go on the 7th episode about injuries, but I feel like that's starting to get out of reach. So
Right.
then I would look more towards, can they get to second in the Central, or even third? Can they just not get a wild card?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm more interested in, at least right now for the time being.
That makes sense. And Ezra, do you agree with that? Would you kind of expand on that if so?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't see this team missing the playoffs. There's not enough challenge coming from the bottom of the Central Division, and they are going to get healthy, and when they do, it's going to turn around. But I think Evan's concern is really valid, because if they end up playing, a Dallas Stars team that's cooking and wins the Central Division and is playing super well, that's going to be a much bigger challenge than anyone else, really. I mean,
For sure.
they're the big contenders. You could end up sliding over to the Pacific and playing Vegas as well. I honestly, I'm kind of cool with that. I would love to
think
see
that
that.
that's
I would love that.
Yeah, that's my
Great.
prediction.
Play anybody in the Pacific.
Yeah, play anybody in the Pacific, exactly. But ending up playing Dallas is a little more challenging. On the flip side, though, I do think if the Avs get healthy and start playing like the Avs we've come to know from the last, specifically last year, but also the years before that, they're going to be dangerous for whoever they play. And
Yep.
I'm not that worried.
See, and that's where the reason why I was like, okay, I'll ask this question, even though I don't think it's that pertinent right now, is if a couple of these guys don't actually return the way we think they are, or return and get injured again, kind of like what happened to Nichushkin, this injury wave can turn from a wave into kind of the story of the season. And Jacob, maybe you can ease my worries. Do you think that that's something to be legitimately concerned about?
It is, but I think that there's one thing, a silver lining, I guess you could say, to all these injuries, is that, say that Nichushkin, he's not going to be ready till the playoffs, they can stick him on long-term IR, and that's a big salary that they free up. And so it is worrisome, all of these injuries, but at a certain point, if it piles up enough, I think that especially with a guy like Nichushkin, where it does definitely seem to be we don't know if he's gonna feel right, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. It's just kind of a day by day basis with him. I could see them saying, you know what, forget it. Just get, rest is the prescription for Nichushkin. Put
Right.
him on long-term IR. Go get Bo Horvat or some other big-time player with a big contract, and then come playoff time, all of a sudden we're feeling a whole lot better about all this.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because that does help in the event that these guys do have a tough time coming back. Their designation can change, and then we're kind of playing ball. Speaking of playing ball, somebody must have saw one. But
Eddie, chill out.
Anyway, so it's something that like I'm not, like I said, I'm not worried yet. I don't think the worry will hit until we're actually out of the playoff picture and we still don't have guys back. The way it is as it sits now, and we'll kind of get into this in our next segment with the comparisons. The way it sets up now, it's really about the divisions. And I think, Ezra, you kind of talked a little bit about that already. So that's a good segue. We're going to jump into the player comparisons. Now, I'm trying to get these cards up on the screen so that the fans can also see what we're talking about. So I'll throw the first comparison up. These are two players. Let me see if I can even do this. I'm supposed to be technologically savvy to do this job, but
I was gonna say, while you're doing that, can I add on something?
For sure.
Yeah. So, we talk about the divisions and where we're gonna end up and all those things.
right.
And there's a couple of caveats to it already. We've already mentioned that players are going to, knock on wood, hopefully come back soon. We saw Helm this morning, at least at the time of this recording, in a normal jersey, which thank goodness, because I mean, just that's a big piece of the Avs that would come back, hopefully soon. And then McKinnon could come back as soon as tomorrow night against Toronto. Landeskog, January, February, whenever that is. But then also the second caveat is that the Avs have still played less games than everybody in the Central.
Right.
Let me see. I'm pulling up the standings really quickly.
Yeah,
the Avs have played
everyone ahead of them has played more games than them.
Right.
So the Avs have played 34, and then like Dallas, who's leading, has played 37.
Okay.
So
That's a lot of games.
And the Avs they're in the first wild card spot right now, and they're 1 point behind Minnesota, but Minnesota has already played an additional game as well. So there's still plenty of time to be working through this, and knock on wood that everything goes right along the way, and that it'll only help the Avs climb up the standings.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jacob.
I say, just to piggyback off Evan's point, I'm looking at natural stat trick, their advanced stats, and so like Corsi 4 at 5-on-5, the Avs are 6th in the NHL, and so the process has been pretty good this year. They've played well, they've played their system. But if you switch it to expected goals, you can see where they drop off, and they're 24th in the NHL at expected goals at 5-on-5. And so, I think that's just where you see the injuries, taking their toll, that they can play their system, but without like Nathan McKinnon, that's the engine that runs everything. And so they can keep puck possession, they can keep, playing their game, but they're just struggling to put it in the back of the net right now. And you would hope that, when McKinnon comes back, that can help ease that a little.
I think now is the time that I've noticed his absence more than literally ever in his career, which I think does say a lot about how McKinnon has grown as a leader and not so much as obviously he's gotten better skill-wise and production-wise. That's definitely the important part. But I think the other side is like no Landeskog and no McKinnon. We're seeing Mikko kind of fill those shoes the best way he can, which to me is like he just puts the puck in the net. That's what Mikko knows how to do, and that's his version of leadership, and I'll take that from him, honestly, because like you said, when we get McKinnon back, you'll see a different side. And I think, Evan, you might have tweeted last night during the game, like, I think the Avalanche have got their groove back or something to that point. That won't be
a little premature.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We won't
happens to
talk
the
about
best
that.
of us. I will say, though, in those moments, we did see some of that as the not so happy old people in the industries put it, skilling it up. I love it when the Avalanche play like that and kind of play with their food like that. last pass to Comfer really wasn't necessary, but did you see how open that net was and how nice that felt? So I'm kind of cool with that play style, and I think that doesn't really come back all the way until you have McKinnon back in the lineup. We saw Makar doing Makar things, but even then, he's usually dishing to 29 who can finish, and that's kind of what we're missing right now. So that's
and if I could add to that,
For sure.
I think like we've seen slow starts from this team pretty much every game since McKinnon got hurt, and with no McKinnon and no Landeskog, they're the two guys who jumpstart this team are both out, and we're seeing it. Sometimes they overcome it, they come back and they give up an early lead, they come back and they win, but like last night they gave up an early lead, they came back, took a lead, and just didn't have enough gas left in the tank to keep it going. So it's those early leads that are so frustrating, and something that I think McKinnon specifically helps a ton with.
Yes.
But then Landeskog obviously also helps with that too.
For sure,
So
because a lot
getting
of
those guys back is going to make a big
Yeah,
difference.
a lot of those early chances that are just early chances are early goals when you have guys like McKinnon on the ice. We've seen it time and time again. The Avs score in like the first 2 minutes of the game in big games against good teams. So you're totally right.
Yeah, and it's conversions of chances, but I also mean just in terms of like the intensity of starting games.
Right.
McKinnon is such an intense guy. We all
you're
know
around
that.
him.
Everybody who's ever watched him.
Yeah.
And Rantanen is not. And if Rantanen's your leader, you're going to start a little slow. And,
For sure.
and that's not to knock Rantanen because he's great at what he does, but he is definitely a more laid back dude.
Yeah, he's
So
his
just,
own guy. Because I think he's
Yeah.
not to say that he's lazy or anything, but he's notorious for being like the last one in to skate. But he's usually playing pretty well. So whatever his technique is, it works for him. So like I said, I'm not dogging the guy, but you're totally right. It's McKinnon never turns off. Like everything he eats, everything he does goes into performing on the ice. Even playing Fortnite, I imagine he's found a way to construe that in his mind to feel like it helps. It's probably that downtime, right? So, but nonetheless, let's get into this player comparison segment that took me so long to actually come up with. But I got them on the screen now, and I'll preface this with, once you know who they are, it'll make total sense why I put them on, but it's probably going to piss you off because this is that hill I love to die on. So I think we talked a little bit too much before we came on today, so I'll just spill the beans. The bottom one is definitely JT Compher, and Ezra, you picked me out. It didn't take long. So now the debate.
I don't know the top one.
So
though.
yeah, let's
So-
talk about Ezra. Who do you think the top one is, since you pegged me on the bottom?
Can I ask for a clue?
You can.
It's a simple clue. It's
For
a
sure.
simple clue. Is this an Avalanche player? Current Avalanche player?
Not a current Avalanche
Okay,
player.
is it Nazem Kadri?
It is absolutely Nazem Kadri.
Oh.
Okay.
So-
okay, that's what I thought.
That's the reason why I wanted to bring this to the table, even though it's kind of cringy, is I feel like the 2C role that is going to be talked about when everything settles is not really going to be talked about when everything settles. And here's why. Because I think that the Avs are going to make up for it. And I say this all the time, sound like such a nerd. But in the aggregate, and I say this because we have like 6 3Cs, it feels like, in my mind. So I think that will go a long way to alleviating it. Not to mention, if you look at JT Compher's production, he's really not that bad of a replacement over Nazem Kadri. Obviously, you can see here he's played against better competition. He's also played with worse teammates. He's finished better, he being Compher finishing better, but everything else was Kadri. What is your take on all this, Jacob?
I mean, the finishing figure really does jump out a bit.
Right.
That probably is tied into how good Compher is at deflecting shots.
Right.
That I'd imagine that's where a lot of that comes through. Him being an elite defender, that's nothing surprising. That's
Right.
What makes Compher such an intriguing player. But I think that you look at this and like if you wouldn't have told me that this is JT Comfer, it makes sense that this all is Comfer. The
Yeah.
PK that looks a little weird. It can always that's small sample stuff early in the season, so I don't put too much stock into that. But like that really does kind of paint a picture of who Comfer is as a player, where he his finishing ability, his ability to tip pucks, to get in front of the net, and to do all the dirty things in front of the net, that makes him a legit top 6 player, but he doesn't necessarily have the skill set outside of that to
Right.
really, hang the way that Nazem Kadri can. And so, like, I think that he really is kind of an avatar for how the Avalanche have struggled, in that, they're not getting run over. They're controlling the puck. They're playing their style, but they just, getting that extra oomph to get them across the finish line. They're having a bit of a trouble this year. And I think, Comfort being a little bit out of his depth as a 2C or even a 1C for the last month or so,
For sure.
is part of the big reason why.
Say I have to get over keeping JT Comfort, which I will, because I don't think it's gonna happen. Looking at this and listening to what you say, like the honest human in me says it sounds like he'd be a really good fit for a very particular situation, and he sounds like he fills a role that we don't need to have filled here, in that he doesn't quite fit the way the Avs play in terms of finishing. Although his finishing numbers are good, like you said, he's kind of a model for how they're playing right now, which is solid but not really good enough. And
yeah, I think
go ahead.
So I think that he's kind of a classic guy where if he's your third line center, you're feeling great. Like this, one of the best third line centers in the league. Like, holy cow, we can really drive play. But if he's your second line center, then you're not too upset, but you're not feeling really confident. So he's just that top 9 tweener where he can be a top 6 player, at a time, but really he's better cast as a third line center. Him, Cogliano, O'Connor, I think is kind of the dream that Bednar had to start the season.
Yeah, but the question is, like, where does Newhook fit in that? If he doesn't fit into it, are you then saying that Newhook is just gonna, have another year where he's kind of just on the outskirts of ice time and not really developing? And then you got to ask, should he be playing with the Eagles and just absolutely lighting it up down there to get that confidence and scoring touch? So it's just like, to me, and then we talked a little bit about Horvat earlier, why it seems like an interesting trade would be a piece with JT Compher for that, because and I'll tell you, Horvat's card looks more like Kadri's than Compher's does when you look at their player cards. So that to me says, well, if you have Alex Newhook and you can throw him in your 3C, why wouldn't you trade JT Compher to get an actual 2C along with another piece? Now, that's a whole nother conversation. But, Evan, what do you think of that?
It's a really interesting discussion. I mean, if you want to talk about stories of the year for the Avs, it's injuries and second line center, third line center, however you want to go down with it.
Center. Yeah.
Exactly. Center. So I think I'll look at it this way. For Newhook, at least on talking back to Newhook, up at CSU, I worked with a couple of interns who actually worked with the Colorado Eagles. And when Newhook was sent down at the beginning of last year, at the very beginning of the year after opening night, they said that Newhook was pissed. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He didn't want to work with anybody. And
interesting.
While he did light it up down there, great. And he was back with the Avs within a handful of games after that. I don't know if that would be particularly helpful.
Right.
For this,
sounds like that would be harmful to his
to
his psyche.
And so,
see, this is a delicate situation that Sakic and those guys are going to have to navigate some way.
It really is, and for Compher at least, I think Newhook is also due for a new contract by the end of this year. I know Compher is for sure.
Yeah.
I think Newhook is too. So we might have another like Nazem Kadri and Nichushkin debate that we had at the end of last year. Like, who do you keep out of the guys? And that time it could be between those two. And if you really want to throw in Horvat and be like, oh, but wait, maybe he could be the one instead of Compher or Newhook or whoever, it's a whole fiasco. This is why This is why we're podcasters and not NHL executives. But so it'll be really interesting to see which way it goes either way. I could not tell you what would happen, at least right now. I'm liking Confer in 1C right now with the guys around him, with Rantanen and Lehkonen aside him. I think that has worked pretty well, but that's also just because Mikko Rantanen has been a beast for the last month and a half. So
Right.
Yeah, I think like if I can jump in,
For sure.
I think keeping that line together when everybody's healthy seems like a good idea. Like that line as a line 2, or I love that. Nichushkin with Gabe and Nate as a number 1 line is perfect too. So I mean, I think in a way they have their 2C situation figured out with JT Compher playing the way he is alongside Rantanen. Now, if it's Mikko and Nate back together, I don't know how well that second line does with JT as a center. It just doesn't seem like it's that promising given his track record and what we've seen from him playing with Gabe and either Val or Lehkonen in the past. I don't think that's going to work out. But I do like what I'm seeing right now, and I think there's a way to solve this without making a trade, and it is obviously health number 1, but also structuring the lineup in a way that uses everybody's strengths to their best advantage.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, it would be Gabe, Mac, Nichushkin first line, and then Lehkonen and Confer and Rain. It's like I like that.
I love it.
Interested to see how that would go.
I've loved it for 2 years and I ate a lot of crow for it earlier on in the season, but it literally had everything to do with what we're seeing come to terms within this season, is that when shit hits the fan, pardon my French, you want a guy like JT Compher. And it's not that you don't want a guy like Alex Newhook in that role. It's just that he's a luxury. He's the kind of guy that, like, if you get it when he's performing the way he's capable of, he's probably got the skill to be an actual first line center if he fulfills his potential. I don't think he's even a 2C at the top of his potential, which I think is where this gets kind of construed, because you see what Newhook can become. It's very glaring in just how he moves on the ice. But at the same time, you can't help but notice that JT Compher has had his best month ever of hockey in the most, I would say, opportunistic month of his life as a pro. He's got a contract year, and his team is experiencing injuries, and he's performing better than he ever has. So I'm on the hill of trying to keep him around. I'm with that too, and I want Newhook around too. But like I said earlier, it's just one of those things that they're going to have to navigate in a way that it's a fragile situation for sure.
Yeah.
Here's a wild card I'll throw in just really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Newhook, Compher, and Evan Rodriguez are all on deals until the end of the year.
I was just going to say that.
I'm really liking what I like out of Evan Rodriguez.
Yep.
So it's going to be a hard choice. So anyway, go ahead, Jacob.
I wanted to jump in with some Evan Rodriguez love, because like I mean, Compher has been great, but Rodriguez just he's got skill that Compher doesn't have, and it fits the Avs go style a lot better. That if the Avs are playing their peak style, I think that you have Evan Rodriguez as 2C over Compher. And like the issue with Newhook is he a center? Bednar has moved him to the wing because he says he thinks he skates better on the wing. He doesn't think that he's able to drive up ice as powerful when playing center. And so like I think that's the open question with Newhook going forward is they drafted him as a center and they envisioned him as the inevitable 2C, but again, with how good Rodriguez is playing, Compher, I don't think it's out of the question that they could re-sign Compher, just because like Newhook's a free agent. I don't think he'll be that expensive just because of he hasn't had that
the numbers aren't there. Yeah.
So and so like I don't think the only thing that would throw a wrench into the Avs plans is if some team comes along with a crazy offer sheet and throws it at Newhook, and the Avs just couldn't match. But after the year he's had, I don't see that, and so I think that the debate will likely be Compher or Rodriguez. Which one of those two do you keep?
Which I'm taking Rodriguez based on what you said about him kind of just fitting better, which is kind of what I was leading towards with the Compher stuff earlier. Go ahead, Ez.
Yeah, I mean that there's logic to that. I mean, I think if you just look at the ages of these players and the window of when they're going to be most successful, Rodriguez is 29, Comfort's 27, and Alex Newhook is 21. So if it's me, if I'm playing NHL 21 and I get to make these decisions, I'm signing them all to 2-year contracts, and at the expiration of those two, Rodriguez is gone. He's 31. I'm done with him. Comfer, I don't pay anybody over 30 when I play NHL 21.
I did the same exact thing. I'm always
don't give away your career mode.
Filter by age.
Here.
Yeah.
Comfer, if he's still producing at 29, great. We'll keep him around. And then Newhook, hopefully by then, is ready to actually be a 2C. Right now, he's a 21-year-old kid who, sure, he has to play the wing because he's not strong enough and savvy enough yet to be an NHL center. But that makes sense. He's 21.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd be a senior in college right now. Like,
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Evan.
We're
He's
looking at
Evan.
him.
He is
I
Evan.
can't believe that Newhook is as old as me.
Yeah.
Like,
It's crazy, right?
anyway.
Yeah.
But like, okay, hold on. I do want to go back to the card comparison.
Okay.
Because at least seeing Comfort and Kadri's card side by side, I'm a little surprised that Kadri's card is not higher than it is.
Mhm.
Same.
I definitely thought,
Especially at that
his
price.
I know. I thought his projected WAR would be like in at least the 80s, after his career year that he had. Comfers, I'm pleasantly surprised about. I will say that. So, I just think that the comparison of the two is interesting and a good talking point. So props to you for that, Adrian.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Very good content.
And it's, I don't know. I think it's just one that surprises me. And when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, keeping Comfer for maybe past this year, at least a little longer period of time than Kadri ever was here for a cheaper amount. You're not paying Kadri $9+ million that he wanted. You're saving yourself money in the pocketbook. Ultimately, it looks like a good deal.
Yeah.
And if injuries weren't so much of an issue, I think it'd be a really interesting comparison to see how the two would relate, because Kadri's obviously playing at a higher role in Calgary when there's everyone healthy, and then Comfer would be playing at a lesser role here in Colorado when everyone's healthy. So I don't know. It's a good talking point, and definitely not one I would have expected.
Well, interestingly enough, we have somebody chiming in on our YouTube chat. E-Rich says, Newhook doesn't have the drive/gritness that would fit in a line like LOC and Cogs compared to Comfer, in my opinion. But in this conversation, how important is a center winning face-offs versus just overall production? Who wants to take the face-off question?
I do.
Go
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I say, like, I don't have a whole lot to say other than just like early in this, like before the season, I did I tried to catch up on like a lot of advanced stuffs and
For sure.
advanced analytics and try to understand a lot of that. And a lot of the stuff that I read is that in the aggregate, face-offs don't really matter. Is that like they're not really predictive of anything. It's isolated situations. Like the classic example is like 30 seconds left on the penalty kill.
Yeah.
If you win that face-off, you can effectively kill it. But if you lose it, then there's still 25% of the face-off there. So it's heavily situational, where like there will be 1 or 2 face-offs in a game. They're very, very important, but in the aggregate, they're really not.
So situationally, Ezra, who do you think situationally between Comfer and Newhook has the advantage in terms of face-off? Like, if you need a face-off win, who you going for?
It's clearly Comfer right now. I mean, he's taking I think like 60% of the face-offs right now, something like that. In the last couple weeks, I don't have the actual number in front of me, but yeah, and there's a reason for that. Bednar knows what he's doing. He's choosing the guy who's winning. But again, Newhook's 21. Maybe in 2 years he'll be a guy who can win face-offs too.
Right.
So I don't think that the face-off question needs to factor into any contract decisions at all. Having someone on the roster who you trust to win faceoffs in big moments is important. But that should honestly, going back to NHL 21 real quick, for me, that's my veteran fourth line center that's on every team,
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be your 2C. It needs to be somebody, but it doesn't need to be your 2C. It needs to be somebody who can kill penalties, and that's Comfer.
Yeah. And I fall back on the Matt Duchene story. If you don't forget, the year we were terrible, Matt Duchene led the league in faceoffs, and I think he won something like 90% of faceoffs. But yet there we were experiencing the worst season in franchise history. So, like you said, it really is about situational faceoffs, and I think you're right when you say Comfort takes the nod. But between the two of them, that might be the case. But even in the big picture, he fits that role in the team better than most people do. I think too, like that was one of McKinnon's focuses over the offseason was winning faceoffs. Evan, do you think that the face-off conversation is one that changes depending on the player, or do you think, like they were talking about, it really doesn't matter in the aggregate?
I'm kind of agreeing with Jacob that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It's very situational. I would be interested to see, I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Just have to do some digging of how many face-offs they win on the penalty kill or on the power play, and
because he does a lot of D zone.
zone.
He does a lot of defensive zone face-offs, which is a very important thing. That's the most important situation you can think of, especially if it's on the PK too. So that's thank you, E. Rich. We appreciate you tuning in, man, and giving us something else to talk about. So, kind of branching off of this player comparison, I wanted to do a side-by-side team comparison, and Ezra is just like the masterful Ezra, and he can see straight through me, so he already knows the answer to these, and I think you guys were in the room when he said it, but
I think Evan got it, actually.
Yeah, Evan got it.
I'll take the credit.
I missed it. I was still wandering around looking for the
Okay,
microphone,
cool.
so-
We have
I'm completely
Someone
agreeing
just
with
asked
this
Jacob.
discussion.
All right.
Yeah, just have Jacob.
Jacob, if you had to guess, who are these teams?
So are the Avalanche have to be one of them,
Obviously,
right?
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Oh no, I did get it right. That's right.
Yeah.
is the top one the division rank one, division rank number 1, league rank number 6? That the Avs?
No.
Okay. Just
So
the finishing being
we're
so
the
low is
bottom
what.
one. Yeah.
Okay. So then the other one, is it like Seattle?
I'll give you a hint playing off of that. Go ahead, Ezra.
I'll just tell you who the current first place teams in the other divisions or in the divisions are, so that you can, because that's what that league division rank is. And I thought I had it right in front of me, but I don't. So just 1 second. Sorry.
I know Boston's one of them.
Oh, is it
Carolina,
Tampa?
Dallas, and Vegas.
Ooh.
Say Dallas.
It's not Dallas. I'll give you another hint. It's not the last expansion team, but the one just before it.
So then Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a pretty big hint.
So that was a
Give
very
me the
big
answer.
Yeah.
So the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because look at all these deep metrics and then look at the league rank and division rank. And I want to talk about this to point out the fact that the Avs, we led the show with should we be worried, right? And in reality, if you look at the bigger picture, the answer to that is a pretty hard no. We shouldn't be worried about what we're experiencing right now. In fact, we should be pretty optimistic given the fact that the Avalanche have been shorthanded. So I'll let you go first, Evan. What is your first takeaway looking at these two cards?
Yeah, I mean, all things considered, with everything happening right now with the Avalanche, we are not in a bad spot. It's unfortunate. It obviously could be better, and I think we all wish it was better. But in the grand scheme of things, the Avs are in an all right spot, considering like how they've been. We'll forget the 6-3 loss to Arizona on Tuesday because that was just a trap game waiting to happen.
Yeah.
That the Avs
Arizona's
have
good at home.
Yeah.
that 5,000 seat arena will do things to you, huh?
Yeah, Toronto.
I'm
But-
telling you, a lot of guys missed naps that
Toronto.
day too. Can't miss a nap.
Yeah. So, it and in the grand scheme of things, it's not something to be really worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we get to call it game 60, if we get to game 60 and the Avs are still either in the wild card or just outside of the wild card, that's when I would start to get a little more worried. We're not at the halfway point yet. And if you get once you get to that point in the season, that's when teams are playing their hardest hockey. The trade deadline's right around that time. And there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be happening in the NHL that can flip things around. So that's when I would be a little more concerned, at least right now in the grand scheme of things, especially when you look at this comparison between themselves and Vegas. It's actually kind of a sight of relief, I would
Yeah.
say, to an extent.
Yeah, because all around the hockey world for like the last month and a half, it's been, the Vegas Golden Knights look like they can be that team again. And that's fair. I don't disagree with that. Ezra does. But if
I think we all wish that wasn't the case, but let's be real.
I think the whole internet world just dunked on them when they didn't make the playoffs last year, which was so satisfying. But if you look at the goals against per 60 from year to year for the Avalanche, you see that there's been a little bit of an uptick this year compared to last year, but that's completely explainable, right? If you look at Vegas's, you see a slight uptick, and that's also kind of explainable given that their goaltending has gotten a little bit shaky over the last couple of years. But to me, what Vegas should be a little bit more concerned about is their goal per 60, their goal per 60 is dropping this year. And they're got rid of Pacioretty. It seems like they're trying to bring in all these guys, but simultaneously taking away some of the pieces that they really spent a lot on acquiring. So, Jacob, do you think that, not to draw attention away from the Avalanche and talk about Vegas too much, but am I right in that maybe they should be concerned? Because that's a pretty heavy drop-off if you look at that, especially that 5v5 goals for. That's a pretty heavy drop.
Yeah, Vegas is I think notoriously kind of a tricky team to wrap your head around. They're a threat. Expected goals in the league at 5-on-5. They're third overall behind New Jersey and Carolina. So they're clearly, I think, the best team in that division. The question with Vegas is, that division sucks, and it
Another glaring.
how good are they really? Because you play your division more than anybody else, and so that's it. Not too much of a knock against Vegas because you can't control who you play, but because they've been able to beat up on Vancouver and San Jose and Anaheim. That's actually a segue I want to get into at the Avs at the end of this. Is maybe they have had an easy go of it, and to flip this back to the Avs, their closing schedule is looking really, really nice. In March and April, they have 3 games against San Jose, they have 3 games against Arizona, they have 2 games against Anaheim. They close the season at Nashville, who might be sellers at the deadline. They've got games against Montreal, they've got games against Ottawa. There are a lot of Pacific Division teams that Vegas has been stomping all year that the Avs are going to catch up with towards the end of the season. And so I think it's too early to press the panic button on the Avs, and I also think it's too early to say that Vegas is definitely the the class of the West, just because again that division has not been great. You can make a case that Seattle has been second best team in that division, at least by goal differential. They are. The Kings are in second in that division. They have a -4 goal differential. It's a bad division.
Yeah, it happens that you give up 4 goals. They give up so many goals. It's crazy.
Yeah, and
but at least on the Seattle talk, just really quickly.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
I would love to see the Avs make their way back up to the top of the Central. This is hopeful thinking, and then Seattle ending up in either the first or second wild card, and then having the Avs and Seattle round 1. I feel like that'd be a
cool.
really good matchup. It would be
little Berkey,
awesome.
Avs versus Berkey kind of thing going
Donskoy
on there.
Too, Grubauer.
Yeah,
Ruby.
I like that too.
No.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And just to kind of branch off that even a little bit more, if the Avs find themselves in the similar position where they're good, but they're stacked up somewhere in their division, that's not very ideal. That's a definite possibility that they play somebody over there. So I think too, what I'm kind of taken aback by over here is why, we talk about the Avs are struggling scoring 5-on-5, which is true in recent history, but we're finishing. We're good in goals for. We're good in goals against. I know that that's the whole point of the metric is that it's 5v5. But, like, when you're hurt, you need to be opportunistic. That's more important, I think. Obviously, it's not more important, but it's just as important in order to win when you're hurt to be opportunistic rather than consistent. I don't know. That's probably the dumbest thing I've ever said live. But tell me what you think about that, Ezra. I agree.
Yeah, I think I'm just kidding. The joke was right there. I have to take it.
I was gonna say I lined you up.
There's the comedian in him
It's a
coming out.
softball.
But you know, I think that, like, I think you make a good point, because it is true that the Avs are capitalizing on chances when they get them, and they're just not creating as many chances as we're used to. We see that with the expected goals for number being 13 rather than, you know, Vegas's 5 on here, or what we would expect from the Avalanche historically being a lot higher. But I think just the thing that jumps out to me looking at these numbers here is how is Jared Bednar not in Jack Adams conversations right now?
For sure.
He's keeping this team together, keeping this team afloat in a way, but also, like, keeping them on their game script, keeping them playing well with mostly AHL guys for a solid month. Yeah, you never hear about him in those conversations.
It's funny enough, I get people on
sense.
Twitter who are like, "Oh, Bednar's on the hot seat." I'm like, "What in the world?"
I'm sorry,
fun
you
extension.
can't be on the hot seat the year after you win the Stanley Cup.
Well, I mean, tell that to who was the Capitals coach? He got fired.
Oh, that's true.
That was that Bruce Boudreau?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Whoever it was.
No, it was
Was it
Trotz.
Trotz, Barry Trotz.
Oh, it was Trotz.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was Trotz.
Yeah, they did it to him, but I mean, that was also that's
That
happened
was
to him
money, yeah.
multiple times. I'm pretty sure, because didn't Lou just do that to him too in New York kind of thing? So all they couldn't do was beat the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Avalanche are the only team to do that in the last 3 years. But apparently that was enough. But an interesting point that you make, that we're not talking Jared Bednar and we're not talking about the Jack Adams, because I think you're right, and you brought a topic to the table earlier, and I'll kind of hand the baton over to you, Ezra. You mentioned that Jared Bednar kind of had an opinion on some of the defensive breakdowns we saw.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to pull that up on the screen.
I'll
I
put
don't
the
know if
quote
that's
up
possible,
for
but
sure.
I'll read what I have here. This is from Peter Baugh on Twitter, who said he asked Bednar if he'd consider splitting up the Gerard Johnson pairing after we saw some pretty brutal goals against them in the last few games, but specifically last night there were a couple of chances generated when it seemed like they didn't have their gaps under control and just let Kings players through to score goals. Bednar's response was, I'll just read the quote. Let me make it clear. Those goals last night were not the D's fault with the gaps. Our forwards are there and did nothing. They just skated right through our forwards. We have depth in the neutral zone, and they came right through our forwards untouched. So obviously our D's gaps are going to be bad because they don't know who they're taking yet, right? It's our forwards' job to steer that puck out of the middle of the ice on both those rush goals, and we didn't. And then later he singles out Cogliano and Newhook as the two guys who missed taking the right angles to cut off the Kings players cut through the middle. And it's interesting because, you know, I don't know exactly what the Avalanche systems are supposed to look like. I'm not in those rooms. I don't get to see how they're drawing things up on the whiteboard. But it did look like in the play that we're watching that the two defensemen had the option to take a guy and didn't do it. But if the defensive players are expecting the forwards to force them outside and they're waiting outside for those guys to come over to their area, then, you know, I guess that makes sense. So what do you guys think? Do you feel like what Bednar's saying is taking blame off of the defenseman to kind of deflect, or do you think this is a true reflection of how he's feeling about it? Evan, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna say when you shared that in our Slack channel, I was like, that's an interesting comment. All right.
It is.
Because I kind of see it as a deflection. That's where I see it as. Yes, it is. It's whenever you get scored on at all, it's always it's the entire team. They had to get through the entire team to, you know, get through that. And I mean, personally speaking, that's what I was told. I played soccer and I was a goalie. So I was always pissed whenever something was let in, and my coaches were like, "No, they beat 11 players before they got to you." And so that's the same here in this instance. And in I think the criticism is, the criticism is always necessary, at least for that game time goal in particular. I mean, they moved through too easily, but more particularly, um, Johnson has kept. I think now for the last couple of games, he's been caught out a couple of times, and led on man rushes on. Gerard's been left out to dry a couple of times, and I same thing with Gerard. His effort on that fourth goal. I mean, he kind of just poked out his stick and that was it. I wish that he had maybe stepped up a little bit more to at least put some pressure on Sean Walker and at least be like, if you're getting a shot on net, you're not getting it in between the circles. You're getting it, in at the hashes or something like that. And don't get me wrong, I am a big, big, big Sam Gerard believer. He's still so young, he's still so capable, and brings so much to this team despite his stature. But it's getting hard to defend him, and it's getting hard.
Can I try?
Won't lie. Yeah.
Well, I
Adrian,
think
let's hear
that
it.
you mentioned that play, and I think that play is exactly what Bednar is talking about in this quote. Because if you watch that play, and you're 100% correct, I have 2 points. One is you've gotten way too used to seeing Cale Makar breaking up 2-on-1s that he has no business breaking up. And two,
True.
that is the exact play that he's talking about, in that G has to have the choice to pick and take away the pass, right? That's his job in that position when the 2-on-1. Typically, goalies like you to take away the pass so they can face the shooter and know that if the pass goes, he's not going to give up that backside because you're defending the pass. So my thought process is with Bednar saying what he said, if you don't know who the defender is going to leave, especially if it's a 3-on-1, which that kind of looked like as they broke in, he's not going to know even who to mark up as the guy who's going to get the pass. So he's kind of in no man's land. And then by the time it develops into a 2-on-1, which at speed is literally like a second, he's going to have to make the choice to take the guy who's going to get the pass. And then you see him, and that's when you say you see him wave his stick. That was literally the thought process hitting him late, right? The puck was already at his feet when he's thinking about, oh shit, this is the passer. And then you're doomed at that rate. So I think you're right in saying that he's getting hard to defend. I just don't think that goal is a good example of it. I think you can look more toward his lapses in key moments along the blue line. I think that's been a problem of his for a while. We've seen that come to the forefront, and he's brilliant with the tornado, but sometimes he gets a little bit fidgety up there, and you can lose the puck or just not pick it up off the wall at all altogether. So that's just kind of what I would say in G's defense. But I will say that I agree with you, Evan, when you say this is a bit of a cover-up, a bit of a smoothing over of the situation, because I do think that the back end has shown to be a little bit compromised.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jacob, what do you think of what Adrian and Evan have said, or the initial question?
So I think Evan's got a point as far as like Bednar trying to shield, especially Gerard from criticism. I mean, there's been no Avalanche player that's taken more heat from the Avs fan base than Sam Gerard the last few years. Half the fan base wants him traded every time his name comes up. So I definitely think that's playing into it. But the first thing that came to mind when I saw that quote was how, last year, Darcy Kemper talked about how difficult it was to adjust to the Avs system and how, you saw it in the stats. He was just flat out bad the first few months because the Avalanche do have a different, coverage system defensively. As we're pointing out, we're not in the meeting rooms. We don't know the exact specifics of it, but you can particularly see on the penalty kill how they switch from high to low in a different way in their coverage than a lot of other teams do. And I'm sure that translates to, their regular coverage at 5-on-5. And so part of me wonders, is that just a result of all of the injuries, and you have all of these players who are playing together who haven't played together all year, and so a lot of the Avalanche coverage ties into their chemistry. And if you're playing a bunch of minutes with a guy, you get a sense for where he's going to be. But if you have a new set of line mates every single night, it makes it a lot harder to gel, particularly in a system that seems to be as complex as the Avalanche's defensive system is. And so I kind of think that a lot of these defensive breakdowns are probably just the result of a lack of chemistry, that a lot of these guys haven't played together the whole year. And I think that you see that, in Bednar's unwillingness to break up the Comfer, O'Connor, Cogliano line. That throughout all the injuries, he was shuffling everything around, but he didn't want to touch that line until he basically had no choice, and he had to elevate JT Comfer. But I think that you really see how important continuity is to the Avalanche's defensive scheme, and I think that stuff like plays like that are where we're starting to see it rear its head a little bit.
Yeah, and
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
go ahead, Adrian.
I wonder too, like, usage for Girard and Johnson in particular. Like, oh, poor Eric Johnson, right? My guy, he's like, I guarantee you, he probably thought once or twice about hanging it up last year.
Sure.
And I think, like, he's like, oh yes, we're coming back, and then these guys just start dropping like flies left and right, and he's like, but I'm the old man. Well,
It should be me.
Yeah,
seriously, if anybody was going to be put on long-term
the ice
IR,
bag was I brought in that ice machine, you know what I mean? So it's like, this dude is probably working more than he anticipated this season. And I wonder if that's why we're seeing some of this rhetoric too from Bednar that kind of is like, it's saying, we need to rely on these kids that we've brought up to fill these voids, to do better job at what they do. When in reality, it's like, well, yeah, our defenders are struggling, but it's a process, and the process is a little bit tarnished when your depth isn't quite there. Like, not having Bo Byram sure hurts. It's pretty crazy. We were good at glorifying Bo Byram in the playoffs for his performance, but I don't think we realize how important his absence has been this year to the Avalanche's defensive core, because I think you're right, Ezra, and you said the same thing, Jacob. Like, their defensive strategy is typically a little bit more different than It's typically a little different than everywhere else in the league, and you want to call on the guys who've been doing it for a while, recall. And as weird as it sounds, Bone Byram is one of those guys. He has experience in the system. Ezra, I'll take it back to you. What was, like, you brought this to the table, so what jumped out to you, and why were you thinking, or what were you thinking of these comments?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was just it's a really interesting conversation, because a lot of the reaction to what happened last night was to take swipes at EJ and Girard, and I think that was the easy choice. But if you're not looking at the whole picture, then it's easy to maybe overlook that the forwards have a big role in that defensive structure, and speed through the neutral zone is something that the Avalanche pride themselves on and thrive off of offensively, and try to limit defensively, and they allowed it there, and that's a big that's a big knock against those forwards who are making those plays. But at the same time, it's like, EJ, you got to know you're slow, hang back a little bit. And Girard, you got to just make a choice, because it's a couple games in a row where he's been in an odd man situation and it seemed like he had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And I don't really care what you do, just do one thing hard,
Yeah.
I'm sure the coaches will tell him what thing to do, but it's like, if you're not going to take one of those three guys on I'm thinking of the previous game, there was a 3-on-1 where he just kind of like waved a stick around.
Yeah.
And then last night, 2-on-1s where he didn't just take one of the guys, he kind of swiped at one and covered the other a little bit. It's kind of like, and I hate to make this comparison, but it's kind of like what we saw from Jacob McDonald before he got benched as a defenseman, with just swiping around at odd man rushes and not making a choice and getting exposed. Girard is obviously much better than Jacob McDonald. I'm not saying that. I really like Sam Girard, and I think he's a really good player, but he just right now seems a little tentative. So I agree with what's been said about this being kind of a deflection, but also kind of true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to kind of build off of that, that's the last thing I want to say about it, is that in times like now, when a lot of your guys are out when there's how many defensemen are out? Three,
Three,
four,
three.
something
I
like
think it's
that.
three.
Yeah.
Three. Yeah.
Manson,
Mhm.
Byram. Who am I missing?
I think it's just those two.
Oh, two
Oh,
then,
It's
yeah.
just those two?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
because McDermott is back,
McDermott's
but just
back,
not
yeah.
I
playing.
say, but yeah,
he's
also
forward.
technically
Still.
not a defenseman anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
Point being, like you look for guys like Sam Girard to step up and take initiative and lead this team forward. We've seen that happen before, and I wish we would see that at least a little bit more.
Well, he
at
did
least
get a game-winning goal last week.
He
Yeah,
did.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And he has his moments where he's the same brilliant Sam Girard, and he is still very good at a lot of things. It's just a little bit of like decisiveness that I want to see from him on the defensive end
Mhm.
that I'm not seeing
I
right
think
now.
that's fair, and I think that's
Bingo.
always been people's problem with him, right? The first one, which is the most layman one, which is that he's too small and not physical
Mhm.
enough to play the position.
which
And then
it's
the-
not 1997
Yeah,
anymore.
exactly. And then the next one is that, which I agree. I think defensively, what I've always felt this way, and I felt this exact way about Tyson Berry, coincidentally, which is that much like a really productive offensive guy that can't play defense, it's kind of one of those situations where you kind of take the good with the bad as long as it fits your team. And it doesn't fit the team right now because we don't have that defensive depth, because he's not insulated. He's the guy right now. You know what I mean? So I think that plays a big role. But at the same time, that's the way this goes. Like, you're going to have to step up from year to year based on injuries as a pro. And Sammy's on a more long-term contract than most defenders get at his age. He deserved it. He earned it. But, I mean, with that comes a little bit more responsibility. So I don't think it's unfair to expect him to improve a little bit defensively.
Yeah, and I think this ties into something that Jacob pointed out at the beginning of the season, which was that coming into this year, looking at the roster, the big hole was defensive
You
depth.
did.
And
I hate that called it.
I know, right? And that is like, it's a valid concern with the front office that they didn't shore up any kind of seventh defenseman situation beyond a bunch of guys who are proving that they're not capable of doing it in McDonald and McDermott, and to an extent Brad Hunt, who is playing well right now, but he really shouldn't have to be. Andreas Eglund is a nice
We'll just
surprise.
ignore
I
the
like
save.
him.
England for your ninth defenseman has been great, but like
I
as a
like
ninth
England.
defenseman, not not as a
He
sixth
had a rough
defenseman.
start.
I'm honestly kind of happy with him as a sixth defenseman. I don't mind. I'd rather he be somebody who doesn't have to be in the lineup every night, but I like what he's doing. I think he's been a pleasant surprise, but it just seems like there needs to be a change made between McDonald, McDermott, and Hunt for somebody who can actually defend.
That's
It is. It's a little awkward because, like, McDonald and McDermott are, they're fourth line wingers at this point who barely even play. The way that Bednar is shuffling lines right now is they're a 3-line team, and then he kind of mixes and matches for whoever needs a breather here and there. And so, like, the idea that both of those guys are on the defensive depth chart, I think that's gone at this point. That Englund and Hunt have passed both of them, and frankly, I feel better now than I did at the beginning of the season with Englund and Hunt instead of McDonald and McDermott.
Agreed.
But like at least Hunt has shown that puck moving prowess, that he fits in the system. And England's been a very steady big body defenseman. He can kill penalties in a pinch if you really need it. And so, like, as pessimistic as I was about their depth at the beginning of the season defensively, I do feel better now than I did to start the year.
That is interesting because England got off to a rough start, but he has turned it around. He's like you said, it's like I talked about Gorgiev. It just feels better. I feel more confident when the team is heading towards that end of the ice, knowing that it's the third pair with those guys on than I do when McDonald was on the ice and when McDermott. Honestly, no offense to McDermott, but that's not what he does. That's not who he is. That's not why he plays hockey, and we all know why he plays hockey. He and I don't really need to elaborate, but anytime anytime he's a part of your 7 defenders, you should be slightly concerned. And we saw that in the playoffs. If he was valuable in big moments, he would have played in the playoffs, but he didn't. And everybody, when we lost, I think we only lost 4 games all playoffs, right? Every game was always, well, when is McDermott going to get out there? Especially when we saw guys like Kadri going down and stuff with cheap shots. And it's like, guys, that's exactly what they're wanting us to do. They're wanting us to respond and change our identity to suit this style of hockey, because that's not what the Avalanche play. So the Avs did a really good job of not taking the bait. And I think as a fan base, especially with a guy like Girard, don't take the bait is the same advice I would have with him. It's like, yeah, he's small, but that's not what a defender is anymore. It's not a big dude who can ride you into the corner. It can be. That is an effective thing, but even those guys are skilled now. Even those guys can
very
move
important
the puck now.
Question based on that. Do you guys think Darian Hatcher would make the NHL at this point? Do you remember that guy?
Yeah.
I don't know. This depends.
I don't know. He might. Let's say he might.
I think I'm too young for this question.
Okay. Yeah, that might be
McDermott
true.
Here, I'll Google it for you.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't play unless it's
he was
some prep team.
He was like the Dallas Stars' attempt to have an Adam Foote, but he couldn't skate.
He had some lettuce. I'll give you that. Yeah. Let's see. He was 6'5", 235 pounds. He played for the Stars. Yeah. 6'5".
I hated that guy. That's why he was a captain. He was like, yeah, he was a good player for them, but I just don't think he's like, yeah, he'd be like a Keaton Middleton now.
Check this out. You want to hear something crazy based on what you just said? This is a great example of how much the league has changed. He was drafted in 1990. That's 30 years ago, give or take a couple years. 8th overall pick.
Yeah.
So that's what they valued back then was size, right? Size. If you could skate.
Oh, yeah.
And if you were big, bring it on. You're getting my 8th overall pick. And now we're talking, would this dude even play? So
they never scored 20 goals in his entire career.
Yeah.
Not even in the minor leagues.
He did have a pretty righteous mullet as a young man, though, so I gotta pay respect to that. Yeah. That's something that I always get fired up on Twitter about, which is when it's the same, always the same topic and always the same counterpoint when it comes to Girard. Well, he's just not that physical. And that's actually not true. We've seen plays where he takes the body on guys bigger than him.
Look at his hit last
night.
He
laid a dude out last night.
Yeah.
It didn't stop a goal from happening, but it was nice.
It was like that
frustration. It was maybe
hit.
ill-advised, but it was nice.
I also think that that point kind of misses the idea of what makes a good defenseman at this point. A lot of people think, you want a defenseman who's mean and nasty that's going to beat people up. No, you want a defenseman that's going to get the puck out of their own zone. Yeah. That is the most important thing that you can do as a defenseman. And he's really good at that. Like he is, as far as zone exits go, he can do it on his own. And so his skating ability defensively is a very big asset that he can utilize. You don't see Josh Manson skating the puck, out of the zone by himself. He's got to pass it out. They got to use the system because that's, he's more of an old school defender like that. And so Girard, his skating ability is a huge asset defensively that can kind of bail the Avs out, in some sticky situations.
Yeah, and what better example than Makar? Like how much meaner does it get than when he goes coast to coast on a team and does that little dipsy do where he looks like he's gonna dump, but he's still somehow skating forward? Like that's mean. That's nasty. That'll piss you off.
Exactly. And which defenseman are we more excited to get back? Right, the old school Josh Manson or the new school Bowen Byram? It's Bowen Byram.
It's Bowen Byram.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good on you, Evan. Yes. Yeah, I will say though, Manson had the biggest save of the playoffs. He'll go down in Avs folklore for that save he had. So
I love Manson. I want him back too.
Yeah.
But
he funny enough, he was literally brought in to be G's partner. So that shows you it's like those two styles, they go good together. And if you have you lean too heavily in one direction on a pairing, that's when you run into trouble. But that doesn't mean that a play style like Girard's doesn't fit in your top 6 or your top 4 pair. That means
Yeah, the problem is just that EJ can't be Josh Manson anymore.
exactly,
And
that's
but
what we can't expect him to be.
Mhm.
Josh Manson
No.
either. So that's just we're taking it right now. We're taking our lumps. That's what it means to be a fan. And as these guys start to get better and healthier, we'll start to see the semblance of the absolutely dominant defensive core we saw last year, right? Which is probably why management was like, I think we'll be okay. We had the most dominant defensive production year in the history of hockey. So maybe we'll just ride on that. And thank God that we've seen some of these young guys come up and fill those other roles, because I do think that may have been ill-advised, although true, like Jacob pointed out, the defensive depth was an issue and is an issue right now for sure. So
Who knew losing Jack Johnson would be such a big deal?
No.
well, he would have
Yeah.
he probably would have scored the first goal of this year too.
That's true. That's what he does. 1 goal a year.
1 goal a year, the first one. Well, right on,
Didn't
gentlemen.
he did that for Chicago too, didn't he?
Yeah,
I
he
think so.
did. He did.
Yeah.
Weirdo.
Yeah.
That's Jay Fresh. Hey, by the way, yeah, we used Jay Fresh's player cards today. So if you like those player cards,
give him
be
a
sure to
follow.
head over there. He's got some good analytics stuff. I think it's Money Puck that does all the data. I can't remember. I know he uses a data aggregate that gives him all this information. That's how he gets these cards. They're pretty insightful. So head on over there and check them out. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was, if you folks have been listening on our podcast when we release them on Spotify and Apple and all that jazz, don't forget to listen to us live. We broadcast every single show live on our YouTube channel, and typically we start by me making a fool of myself for like the first 10 minutes, and that's pretty entertaining if you've never seen me make a fool of myself. So head on over to our YouTube channel, click that subscribe button. Be sure to go follow all these guys on Twitter, and head on over to the website and see and read their latest and greatest work. I know, Evan, I think, was it you that wrote about the possible worries? Is it time to worry, or was that Jackie on the Morning Flurry?
I think it was me on the Morning Flurry. I didn't an updated injury list, but
Oh, you want to hit us
I don't
with
know.
it? Hit us with it.
oh god,
Pull
well,
up-
it's already outdated. I have
It's
to
already
pull up.
From this morning?
I have to pull it up. No, it was. I think I published it yesterday.
Oh, okay. I was like, it's
couple days
outdated,
ago.
and you published it this morning. Well, nonetheless, head on
No.
over to the website. Give all those articles a read. We're very, very much in tune with what's going on with the Colorado Avalanche. We're sorry we weren't able to bring a guest on this week. It just didn't work out, but we have some exciting and surprising stuff in the works for our guest next week. Thank you, folks, so much for listening and tuning into the broadcast. My name's Adrian. I'm here with Evan, Ezra, and Jacob. And go Avalanche, and, just be thinking about JT Comfer and wonderful things in the meantime. Till next time, have a good one, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, hey, there you go. Happy New Year. Sorry. Ezra, you need to be the host. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the last episode that I'll be hosting. Thank you. No, Happy New Year to you guys as well. We appreciate y'all. Have a nice day.